The first thing Daniel Carter noticed when he stepped inside the Whitmore estate was not the marble floors or the vaulted ceilings. It was the painting. It hung on the far wall of the main living room, large framed in dark wood, lit by a single overhead light. A young woman with long brown hair and a quiet smile looked out from the canvas with an expression so familiar it stopped him cold. Daniel stood motionless in the doorway, his throat tightening. He knew that face. He had loved that face. That was his wife, the woman who had vanished from his life years ago without a single word. Daniel had taken the job because he had no other choice. 3 weeks earlier, a logistics company in South Boston had let him go along with 14 other warehouse workers, a round of cuts dressed up in the language of restructuring. He had spent the next 2 weeks sending out applications, following up on leads that went nowhere, and working the occasional day shift for a friend who ran a small moving crew. Then came the posting temporary estate manager, 6 weeks competitive daily rate, no prior luxury experience required. It was the kind of job he would have scrolled past a year ago. He did not scroll past it this time. The agency had told him very little about the employer. Female, mid-30s, privately wealthy, currently between permanent household staff. The property was a Beacon Hill estate, 4 stories of pale brick and iron railings set behind a narrow courtyard. Daniel had worn his one good jacket to the interview, answered every question directly, and left without expecting a callback. The callback came the next morning. He started Monday. He arrived at 8, was met at the door by a housekeeper named Margaret, who was clearly working out her final days before retirement, and was handed a binder with the week's schedule and a brief set of household rules. Margaret walked him through the kitchen, the utility rooms, and the main staircase without much conversation. Then she opened the double doors to the living room and stepped back to let him enter first. That was when he saw it. The portrait hung centered on the far wall, framed in dark walnut, positioned above a low console table with a single white orchid on it. The light from the window hit the canvas at an angle that made it look almost photographic. A young woman, long brown hair, quiet expression, a small curve at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. It was the kind of face that looked like it was about to say something important and had decided at the last second to keep it to herself. Daniel had seen that expression thousands of times, across a kitchen table, in the passenger seat of his old truck, in the pale light of early morning before either of them had said a word to each other. He knew every line of that face the way a person knows the layout of a home they have lived in for years, not from memory, but from muscle. His body recognized her before his mind had finished processing what he was looking at. He stood in the doorway without moving. Margaret said something behind him. He did not hear it. Sophia. That was Sophia. He had not seen her in 4 years. She had not called, had not written, had not appeared at the door or sent a message through anyone they both knew. One morning she had been there, and by evening she was gone, and the only thing she had left behind was her half of the closet and the particular silence that fills a space when someone who used to occupy it no longer does. He had filed a missing persons report. He had hired someone to look. He had eventually stopped, not because he gave up, but because every road ended the same way at nothing. And now her face was hanging in a stranger's living room in Beacon Hill. He turned around slowly. Margaret was watching him with the cautious expression of someone who had learned not to ask questions in this house. At the far end of the hall, a door opened, and a woman walked toward them with the particular kind of unhurried pace that belongs to people who have never had to rush for anyone. Olivia Whitmore was not what he had imagined. She was younger than her reputation suggested, early 30s, dark hair pulled back, simply wearing a gray blazer over a white shirt with the sleeves pushed up. She carried no phone, no folder, nothing. She looked like a person who had already decided everything before walking into the room. She introduced herself, briefly asked if Margaret had covered the schedule, and then looked at Daniel with the attentive, slightly impersonal focus of someone conducting a performance review on a stranger. It was not unkind. It was just efficient. Daniel answered her questions. Yes, he had reviewed the binder. Yes, he understood the supplier contacts. Yes, he could manage the Thursday dinner arrangements. His voice came out level and professional, which surprised him because the entire time he was speaking, he was aware of the portrait behind him, the way a person is aware of a fire in the next room. When there was a break in the conversation, he did not let himself overthink it. He turned slightly toward the living room and said, keeping his voice even, "I noticed the portrait in there, the woman in it." He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "Ma'am, that's my wife." The room did not react the way rooms do in movies. Margaret did not gasp. Olivia did not take a step back. What happened was quieter than that, and more unsettling. Olivia's expression did not change exactly, but something behind it did a small internal recalibration that he caught only because he was watching her closely. She looked at him the way a person looks at an equation when they realize one of the numbers is wrong. "I'd like you to explain what you mean by that," she said. So Daniel told her. He did not dramatize it. He kept it short and factual, the way you tell a story you have told yourself. So many times it has lost most of its edges. He and Sophia had met through mutual friends, dated for just under 2 years, married in a small civil ceremony. They had been married for 3 years when she disappeared. No fight, no warning, no note. He had looked for her. He had never found her. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at a point somewhere past his left shoulder. Then she asked for the name again. He said it clearly, Sophia Blake. Something shifted in Olivia's face. Then not shock exactly, but recognition. The kind that comes with weight attached to it. She looked at the portrait through the open doorway, then back at Daniel, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its professional efficiency. It was flatter, more careful. "Sophia Blake," Olivia said quietly, "is my sister." Daniel did not respond immediately. He stood in the hallway of the Whitmore estate, in a house he had walked into that morning as a temporary employee, and absorbed the fact that the missing woman he had spent 4 years not finding was the blood relation of the woman standing 3 feet in front of him. The portrait on the wall behind him suddenly meant something entirely different. Not a decoration, not a commission, but a record of someone who mattered deeply to this family and had at some point stopped being present in it. He looked at Olivia. She looked at him. Neither of them had any idea yet how much the other person knew or what the knowing was going to cost them both. Olivia did not invite him to sit down. She led him to the study at the end of the hall, a room with bookshelves on 3 walls and a desk that looked like it had not been used for casual purposes in a long time, and she stood near the window with her arms crossed and her expression back to something controlled and unreadable. Margaret had disappeared quietly, the way good household staff always do when a room changes temperature. "I need you to understand something," Olivia said. "People have tried to approach this family with claims before. About Sophia, about our assets, about things they say they know. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you that I have learned to be careful." She said it without hostility, but without apology either. It was a statement of policy, not of feeling. Daniel nodded. He understood the position. She was in a wealthy woman, a missing sister, a stranger standing in her house, saying he was family by marriage. If their positions had been reversed, he would have said the same thing. "I can prove it," he said simply. "I have the documents at home. I can bring them today." Olivia studied him for a moment. "Then bring them." He drove back to his apartment in Dorchester, a second-floor unit in a triple-decker that he had moved into a year after Sophia vanished. He had not been able to stay in the apartment they had shared, not indefinitely. In the back of his closet, behind a box of work boots and a duffel bag he never used anymore, was a smaller box. He did not open it often. He pulled it out now, set it on the bed, and went through it methodically. The marriage certificate was in a manila envelope, still crisp. The photographs were held together with a rubber band that had dried out and snapped years ago. So they were loose, maybe 40 or 50 prints from the 3 years they had been together, the kind of photos that exist because someone picked up a camera and pointed it at a person they wanted to remember. There were also letters, not many, maybe a dozen, written in Sophia's handwriting on plain notebook paper, the kind she favored because she found formal stationery pretentious. He had kept them because he had not known what else to do with them, and throwing them away had never once felt like something he was capable of doing. He put everything back in the box, carried it to his car, and drove back to Beacon Hill. Olivia went through the documents at the desk in her study, and Daniel stood near the door and watched her. She read slowly. She looked at the marriage certificate for a long time, the date, the signatures, the official seal. She went through the photographs one by one, holding each one at the same careful angle, her face giving almost nothing away. When she reached the letters, she read the first one, and then set it down, and did not pick up the others right away. The room was quiet for a long stretch of time. "The arranged marriage," Daniel said, not as a question. He had not known the specific details, but in the months after Sophia disappeared, he had learned enough about the Whitmore family to understand that she had not left behind a simple life. "She told me there had been someone the family wanted her to marry before she met me. She never told me who." Olivia looked up from the letter. "A family named Caldwell. They had significant financial ties to our father's firm. It was meant to consolidate a partnership." She said it the way someone says a thing they have rationalized for years and are only now in this particular moment hearing back as what it actually was. "She refused. She was 24. She told my father she would not go through with it, and then she disappeared from our lives entirely." "She didn't disappear from your lives," Daniel said. "She married me. We were living in Jamaica Plain. We had an apartment, jobs, a life. She wasn't hiding from the world, she was hiding from your family specifically." Olivia set down the photograph she was holding. It was one of the older ones, Sophia, at a picnic table somewhere, laughing at something off camera, her hair pulled up and her shoulders sunburned. In that way, she always refused to acknowledge until 2 days later, when it started to peel. Olivia looked at it the way a person looks at evidence of time they cannot recover. "She never contacted me," Olivia said, and for the first time, her voice carried something other than control. It was brief, a tightening quickly managed. "Not once. I looked for her. Not the way my father looked for her, which was through lawyers and financial leverage. I looked because she was my sister. I never found anything." "Neither did I," Daniel said. "After she left." Olivia looked up at him. "When exactly did she leave?" He told her. 4 years ago. A Tuesday in October. He had come home from work, and the apartment was the same as he had left it, except that her coat was gone, and her bag, and a few things from the bathroom. No letter. No message. No call. Just absence, sudden and complete the way a light goes out. Something moved through Olivia's expression, a thought arriving that she clearly did not welcome. She looked back at the documents on the desk, and then she turned in her chair and opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a flat, dark blue folder that she placed on the desk in front of her without opening it immediately. "I have been trying to understand for 4 years why Sophia cut off contact with me specifically," she said. "I told myself it was about the family, about our father, about the Caldwell situation. But I hired a private researcher last year to go through old correspondence internal records. Anything that might explain where she went and why she made the choices she made." She opened the folder. Inside was a stack of photocopied documents, emails, internal memos, what looked like records from a legal firm. What he found was not what I expected. She turned the folder toward Daniel and let him read. The documents were from a law firm that had worked extensively with the Whitmore family. Over a period of several months following Sophia's initial disappearance from the family, there had been a series of communications about how to, in the language of the memos, discourage unsuitable attachments. There were references to a background investigation on an unnamed male party described only as a warehouse worker, South Boston, no significant assets. There were references to a consultation about whether certain employment and financial levers could be applied without direct legal exposure. It was all phrased with the particular care of people who know exactly what they are doing and are determined to create as little written evidence of it as possible. Daniel read the pages twice. He kept his face still, but his hands tightened on the edge of the folder. This was the machinery that had existed around Sophia's life while she was living quietly in an apartment in Jamaica Plain with him while they were doing grocery runs and watching television on Sunday mornings and having the small, ordinary arguments and resolutions that make up a marriage. There had been people in suits in offices downtown deciding what shape that life was allowed to take. They were watching me, he said. And planning? Olivia said. I don't know how far it went. I don't know what they actually did versus what they only considered doing. My father died 2 years ago, and he took a great deal with him. But yes, there was a systematic effort to assess and potentially disrupt her life with you, and I didn't know it was happening. She said the last part with a precision that suggested she had said it to herself many times and was still not finished reckoning with it. Daniel set the folder down. He looked at the wall at nothing in particular. He was trying to hold two things at once, the fact that this had been happening and the fact that Sophia had known it was happening. She had been living inside that pressure and had never once told him. She had carried it alone and said nothing. And then, one October day, she had walked out of their apartment and into thin air. She knew, he said. I believe so, Olivia said. And she still didn't tell me. Olivia did not answer that directly, because she did not have an answer for it, and she was. Daniel was learning a person who did not speak when she did not have something accurate to say. She turned back to the folder and lifted one of the pages near the back, a photocopy of a handwritten envelope, addressed and stamped, but never postmarked. This came up in the search as well, she said. It was found in a storage unit that belonged to a woman named Ruth Albright, a housekeeper who worked for my father for many years. She passed away 14 months ago. Her estate was being cleared, and the researcher flagged this because the return address was a post office box linked to a name that matched Sophia. She held out the envelope. Daniel took it. The handwriting was Sophia's. He would have known it anywhere. The particular slant of it, the way she formed her lowercase letters with more pressure on the downstroke. The letter inside was folded in thirds, the paper a little worn at the creases, as though it had been folded and unfolded more than once before being sealed. He read it standing up because sitting down was not something his body was willing to do at that moment. The letter was addressed to no one by name. It read like something written to be found, rather than sent a record or a confession, or both. Sophia wrote that she had become aware of what her father's people were doing. She wrote that she had been given a choice, not in words, but in the way choices are communicated, when powerful people do not want documentation of the communication. Leave Daniel return to the family and the Caldwell arrangement, or watch the people trying to disrupt her marriage escalate until Daniel's employment, his reputation, and his livelihood were systematically removed. She wrote that she had spent 3 months trying to find another way. She wrote that she had not found one. She wrote that she was leaving because she loved him, not despite it. She wrote, "If I stay, they will take everything from him. If I go, he only loses me. That is the only math that makes sense, and I hate that it does." Daniel folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. He looked at the window at the narrow strip of Boston sky visible above the roofline across the street. 4 years. 4 years of absence that he had filled with 100 possible explanations that she had stopped loving him, that she had realized she could not live that life, that he had missed something fundamental about who she was. And the real answer had been written on a single page in a storage unit in a dead woman's belongings. She had not left because she was done. She had left because staying would have destroyed him, and she had decided alone in the particular silence of someone who believes they have no other option that his survival was worth more than their life together. All the years he had spent being quietly, carefully angry at her, not furious, never that, but the low, steady anger of someone who has been left without explanation collapsed in on themselves. What replaced it was not relief. It was something heavier than that. It was the specific grief of understanding finally what had actually happened, and knowing that the understanding had come too late to change anything at all. He set the letter on Olivia's desk. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. Olivia looked at him, and in her expression he saw the answer before she said it. "I don't know," she said. "The researcher traced her to Portland, Maine approximately 3 years ago. After that, nothing. She has been very deliberate about not being found." She said it without softening it, because softening it would not have made it true in a different way. "I don't know if she's still in the country. I don't know if she knows our father is gone. I don't know anything past Portland." Daniel nodded slowly. He looked at the letter one more time, at the folded paper on the desk, at Sophia's handwriting. Visible at the edge of the fold, just the curve of a single letter, the beginning of a word he could not read from this angle. He had come to this house this morning to manage a household schedule and coordinate a dinner party. He had come home at the end of it to the most painful and clarifying truth of his adult life. The two things sat side by side inside him, almost absurdly incompatible, and yet that was exactly how the day had gone. Olivia was watching him with an expression that was, for the first time since he had met her, genuinely uncertain. She looked like a woman who had spent years building a clean and manageable understanding of her family's past, and had just watched it become something else entirely. "I'm sorry," she said. It was simple and direct, the way she said everything, but it had weight behind it. "So am I," Daniel said. They stayed in the study for a long time after that. Not talking, there was a period where talking would have been the wrong thing, and both of them seemed to understand it without having to say so. Olivia made coffee, which Daniel accepted, and they sat across from each other at the desk with the folder of documents between them and the folded letter still there at the edge. And they existed for a while in the particular quiet of two people who have just learned something that cannot be unlearned. It was Olivia who spoke first. She set down her cup and looked at the documents, not at Daniel, at the papers themselves, as if accountability had to be directed somewhere concrete. "I want to be precise about what I knew and what I didn't," she said. "Because I think that matters, and I think you deserve the precision." She pulled the folder toward her and looked at one of the memos again. "I knew my father was angry when Sophia left. I knew he had lawyers involved. I assumed it was about the Caldwell arrangement, about financial exposure, about the deal falling through. I told myself it was a business problem he was managing. I did not ask what managing it looked like." Daniel listened. He did not let her off the hook, but he did not cut her off either. He could see that she was doing something real, not performing remorse, not constructing a defense, but actually accounting for what had happened, with the same exactness she applied to everything else. "You didn't know about the investigation into me specifically," he said. "No," she said. "But I knew enough to have asked more questions, and I didn't. I was 28. I had just taken over a significant portion of the firm's operations. I told myself my father's decisions were his to make." She closed the folder. "That is not a defense. It is just what happened." Daniel nodded. He believed her. It was not a comfortable belief. Believing her meant the damage had been done without malice from her direction, which in some ways was harder to hold on to than a simpler version, where she was complicit, and he could be cleanly angry at her. But he believed her. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Olivia looked at him. "I want to find her," she said. "I want to tell her that our father is gone, and that I know what was done, and that she can come back, not to this house, not to the family in the way it was, but to her own life without looking over her shoulder. She has been living in hiding for 4 years because someone made her believe it was the only way to keep you safe. She deserves to know that is no longer true." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about Sophia somewhere in the country, or out of it. He had to acknowledge that possibility, living in the careful, reduced way that people live when they are trying not to be found. He thought about the version of her that had written that letter sitting alone with the calculation of who could survive what, deciding that her own happiness was the variable that could be removed. He thought about how long she had been carrying that decision. "She may not want to be found," he said. "By me, specifically." Olivia considered that honestly. "That's possible," she said. "But she deserves the choice. Right now she doesn't have one, because she doesn't have the full picture. She left to protect you from something that no longer exists, whatever she decides after she knows that that's hers to make." That was the right answer. Daniel recognized it as such, even though it was not an easy one. He picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold, and set it back down. Over the next 3 weeks, Olivia put the same private researcher back to work, this time with a clearer brief and a broader scope. She also went personally to the family's legal firm, not the one implicated in the old memos, but the firm her father had used for estate matters, and requested a full accounting of any actions taken in relation to Sophia between 7 and 4 years ago. Some of the people involved were retired. 1 had died. 2 were still active partners, and their conversations with Olivia were, by her own account, to Daniel not comfortable. She told Daniel about each development as it came. He was still working at the estate. The 6-week contract had not officially ended, and neither of them had brought it up. The arrangement had shifted into something that didn't have a clean name. He was technically still the house manager. They were working on the same problem, and they had coffee in the study most mornings and went over whatever Olivia's researcher had sent the night before. Margaret had retired quietly at the end of the 2nd week as planned. The house was quieter. The work was more honest. The researcher found the thread in Portland, Maine, and followed it south. A social security record, a lease, a library card issued under a name that was not Sophia Blake, but was close enough to flag Sophia Merritt, a combination of her mother's maiden name and a middle name she had occasionally used. The trail led to a small city in western Massachusetts, not far from the Connecticut border. Current. The researcher said he was confident within a reasonable margin. Olivia read the report in the study and handed it to Daniel without comment. He held the address in his hands. The paper was just paper, a printed page from an email, nothing significant about its weight or texture, but holding it felt like holding something much larger than that. He had spent 4 years with Sophia's absence as a permanent fact of his life, something he had learned to carry without putting it down. And now there was an address. Somewhere in western Massachusetts, his wife was living her reduced and careful life, not knowing that the thing she had sacrificed everything to protect him from had dissolved with her father's death 2 years ago. "I should go alone," he said. "Yes," Olivia agreed. He drove out on a Saturday morning. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes. The address was a street in a quiet neighborhood, 2-story houses, small front yards, the kind of block where people know their neighbors by first name and leave their porch lights on at night. He sat in his car outside the Wright House number for a long while before he got out. He rang the bell. He waited. When the door opened, he was looking at Sophia. She had cut her hair shorter just past her chin, now the brown a little darker than in the portrait. She was wearing a sweater and jeans and had the look of someone who had been reading before they answered the door. She stared at him, with an expression he had no word for, not fear, not joy, but something that contained both of those things, and several others, compressed together, happening all at once. He said her name. That was all he said. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. He could see the calculation moving through her, the same calculation she had made 4 years ago running again, now checking whether things had changed, whether it was safe, whether he was real. He waited. He did not push. He had driven 2 hours and 40 minutes, and he could wait a little longer. "How did you find me?" she said. Her voice was the same. He had not expected how much that would cost him. "Your sister," he said. Whatever Sophia had been bracing for, it had not been that. He watched her grip on the doorframe loosen. He told her standing on her porch on that Saturday morning everything she needed to know. He told her about the estate, the portrait, the letter in the blue folder, the documents from her father's law firm. He told her that her father was gone. He told her that Olivia had spent 3 weeks making the family's legal team account for what they had done, and that the Caldwell family had been formally notified that the Whitmore estate had no further interest in any arrangement with them. He told her that Olivia wanted to talk to her whenever Sophia was ready on Sophia's terms at Sophia's pace, and then he told her the thing she had not known when she wrote the letter, the thing she had not known when she sat alone doing the calculation that removed her own happiness from the equation. None of it had worked. He had not been protected by her absence. He had just been without her. Sophia sat down on the front step, not because her legs gave out, but because some decisions need to be made from a seated position. He sat down next to her on the top step, with a few inches of space between them, and they looked out at the quiet street in western Massachusetts together. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. It was not an apology. There was nothing to apologize for. It was a statement of fact, the same kind of precision her sister used. They were, he thought, more alike than either of them probably recognized. "I know," he said. "I read the letter." She turned and looked at him, and he looked back, and the 4 years between this moment and the last time they had been sitting next to each other were present in that look, not erased, not resolved, just acknowledged. They were different people in some ways, the same people in the most important ones. "I don't know how to do this," Sophia said. "Any of it. Where to start?" "Neither do I," Daniel said. "But I think starting is the part that matters." The street was quiet. A neighbor somewhere was mowing a lawn, the sound of it distant and ordinary. They sat on the step in the morning light,